Fabled Heat, where magic meets desire. Subscribe to ignite the fantasy.
My skull rattled against the cold glass, the vibrations of the engine drilling into my temple. Every exhale ghosted the window, a warm fog instantly choked by the freeze outside, while rain slicked the pane like oil. Beyond the glass, the world was dissolving. Gray clouds hung low and heavy, birthing a mist that swallowed the bus as we left town. Buildings replaced by an abundance of trees. They crowded the road, leaving no view but the way out behind us. The bus stopped with a violent jerk. End of the line, the driver hacked, the scent of smoke rolling off him. If you got second thoughts, keep 'em to yourself. I stepped onto the verge and the bus doors hissed shut behind me. The mud was immediate and possessive, latching onto my soles with a heavy, wet drag. I looked up at the sign, weathered and warped, Hollow Pines, the place rumored to swallow people whole. I'm definitely desperate, but living in a forest seemed nice. At least here it was just the loneliness. I looked up, the canopy was thick, a vaulted ceiling of black needles that seemed to absorb the light. The rain wasn't light, it was heavy, soaking me to the bone in seconds. I turned my collar up against the chill, squinting through the downpour. Reception had to be close. I trekked past the empty car park. The entrance was deserted, the booth where security should have been was empty. With no one there to help and the gate locked, I didn't see another way in, so I just climbed over, the mud worsening as the trail narrowed. I didn't mind the soak, the cold was familiar, and the sound of the rain drowning out the world was the only therapy I've ever had anyway. Reception loomed ahead, a transparent box of glass that felt too fragile for these woods. Through the windows, a fireplace sat choked with old ash, looking like an open grave. I saw the abandoned desk and a board behind it hanging from the wall coated in posters. The cold fogged up the glass too much for me to make out anything on them. I scraped the worst of the filth off my feet, more out of habit than respect, and shoved against the glass doors. They didn't budge. I threw my shoulder into them, but the locks were solid. "Hello," I barked into the mist. Silence, just the drip of the trees mocking me. Then I saw a sign pointing toward the staff lodges. Fuck it, I thought. The lodges didn't just look like a worn-down motel, they looked like a place where things went to be left. Several doors on the ground floor hung ajar, revealing dark, yawning interiors that I chose to ignore. I climbed the rusted metal stairs, my boots clanging against the treads, and gripped the cold railing of the second-floor balcony. Looking over into the woods, a thick mist weaved through a chaotic mess of branches like a shroud. Heavy rain was still ongoing, the rhythmic splashing drowned out only by a sudden, violent gust of wind. Without warning, a massive parliament of birds erupted from the tree line, their wings sounding like tearing silk as they fled the branches they rested upon. I pushed off the railing and began checking under the sodden welcome mats. Beneath the fringe of room 7, I found a cold brass key. The wooden door groaned on its hinges, opening into a room that defined soulless. The wallpaper was a sickly, faded cream, matching the threadbare carpet and the skeletal desk. I heaved my drenched rucksack onto the floor, the thud echoing in the cramped space. I turned the lock, a flimsy defense against the vast, dark woods outside, and collapsed onto the bed. The next time I opened my eyes, the world had been swallowed by a thick, suffocating blackness. It wasn't the soft dark of a bedroom, it was the heavy, absolute void of the deep woods. I squinted at the wall clock, its rhythmic ticking the only sound in the room. If the rusted hands were even close to right, it was nearing midnight. My bladder forced me upright. I swung my legs off the bed to face the window, rubbing my eyes with my palms until static flared in my vision. Outside, the rain had turned violent, spitting against the single window pane like gravel thrown by an angry hand. I glanced back at the bed. A jagged spring had punched through the thin mattress, a silver tooth waiting to bite. Whatever. I dragged my feet toward the bathroom. My boots were still on, caked in drying mud that flaked off onto the carpet. The toilet was a map of rust stains. Who actually stays here? Still fully dressed, I rummaged through my bag until my fingers found my smokes. I stepped outside into the heavy night, the cherry of my cigarette providing the only sliver of light against the dark. I took a long drag, only to be cut off by a voice from my left. "You got one for me." I choked, the smoke burning my lungs as I recoiled in shock. "Fuck lady," I managed to wheeze out between coughs. She starts laughing and so do I. "So," she prompted again, her voice cutting through the rain. "Do you?" I fumbled with the pack in my back pocket. I pulled one out and handed it over. Her fingers were cold as they brushed mine. She tucked the cigarette between her lips and waited, her eyes catching mine. I flicked my lighter. For a split second, the flame carved her face out of the darkness, sharp features, messy black hair, and eyes that looked tired. She leaned in, took the light, and exhaled a long, gray plume that the wind immediately whipped away. "So," she said, leaning her elbows on the rusted railing, "I take it you're Nathan." I leaned back beside her, the damp wood of the doorframe soaking into my shirt. "Maybe, or I just broke in here." She let out a dry, raspy laugh. "Honestly, some of these doors don't even have latches left. It was bound to happen eventually." "Why is this place such a shithole?" I asked, gesturing to the room next to me with the door wide open. "No one comes here. We live in the towers." "Then why are you here?" She took another drag, the orange glow illuminating the smirk on her face. "Dan said you'd arrive today. He wanted me to be the one to show you around." Before I could ask what she meant, she stepped closer. The smell of tobacco and damp wool hit me as she leaned in, her breath warm against my ear. "You're going to hate it," she whispered. The words felt like a cold draft down my spine. She didn't wait for a reaction. She flicked her half-finished cigarette into the abyss and stepped back into the shadows of the balcony. "Night, Nathan." "Yeah," I muttered to the empty air. "Night." I stayed there for a minute, watching the spot where she'd vanished. I took one last pull of my smoke, crushed the ember out against the railing, and gave the wall of black trees one final look. The woods felt even larger than they had before. I turned back toward room 7 and listened to the click of the lock, wishing it felt a lot sturdier than it was. A rhythmic, heavy pounding on the door shattered my sleep. "Wakey, wakey," a voice from the other side. I groaned, dragging a palm down my face and feeling the stubble on my chin. My eyes burned as I glanced at the clock. 6 in the morning, Jesus. 1 second, I croaked. Swinging my legs out of bed again, I fumbled through my rucksack, gave myself a frantic, optimistic swipe of deodorant, and shouldered my gear. When I pulled the door open, the world was blinding. The suffocating blackness of the night had been replaced by a sharp, golden clarity. Katie stood on the balcony, the morning light catching the tired lines around her eyes, yet she managed a grin that felt far too energetic for the hour. "Follow me," she said, already turning toward the stairs. "We need to get you your shit." She headed down the rusted metal treads with a surprising amount of enthusiasm, her boots clanging a rhythm I struggled to match. As I followed, I couldn't help but stare. The forest that had looked like a wall of ghosts the night before was now a vast emerald cathedral. The trees were massive, reaching up like ancient towers to pierce the morning sky. Near a cluster of overgrown ferns, I caught the twitch of a rabbit's ears before it vanished into the brush. "Sorry," I called out to her back, my voice still rough from sleep. "I didn't get your name last night." She spun around, stepping backward with practiced ease, balancing on the balls of her feet as we hit the gravel at the bottom. Her messy black hair was a halo of tangled silk in the sunlight. "It's Katie," she smiled. "And what do you do here?" I asked, squinting against the glare. "Are you my boss, or what?" "Oh God, no," she laughed, spinning back around to face the path ahead. "I think Dan would have a genuine heart attack if he left me in charge of anything. I'm a ranger, just like you're going to be, but my post is a 2-day hike into the brush." She glanced back over her shoulder, her grin softening. "I'm just in a good mood because I'm finally getting a neighbor." "Trying to make a good first impression then," I teased. "Why is it working?" She laughed. We reached the reception building. In the harsh morning sun, it looked a little less like a horror movie set and more like a tired relic of the 70s. The sagging porch and peeling paint were still there, but the shadows were gone. Katie reached for the door handle, but it swung open before she could touch it. A police officer stepped out, followed closely by a man wearing a rugged jacket with the Hollow Pines Ranger crest stitched onto the chest. "Appreciate the time," the officer said, adjusting his belt and nudging his hat back. "You gotta understand, I'm just following protocol here." Yeah, I get it," the ranger replied. He spoke with a thick, gravelly Brooklyn accent that felt completely out of place here. "Look, we see something, we call you. Even I've gotten lost sometimes, and if it were up to me, I wouldn't be letting these fuckers in here to begin with. Place is haunted or some shit, I'm telling you, Kyle." The officer gave a short, dry laugh and patted the ranger on the shoulder. He offered Katie a polite nod as he passed, climbed into his cruiser, and kicked up a cloud of dust as he drove off. Katie watched the car disappear before turning to the ranger. "What the hell was that about, Tim?" Tim folded his arms across his chest, his face set in a deep scowl. He looked exhausted, the kind of tired that went down to the bone. Another one went missing last night, he spat, turning his gaze toward the tree line. I tell ya, I'm gonna have a serious word with Dan. This is gettin' ridiculous. Tim reached into his jacket and pulled out a fresh flyer, thrusting it toward Katie. The name Darrell Woodgreen was printed in bold letters above a grainy, black-and-white portrait of a man who looked like he'd been caught mid-blink. I'll print a few more and hang 'em on our way back out, Katie said, her voice dropping an octave as she took the page. Tim finally turned his attention to me, offering a hand that felt like sandpaper. Nice to meet you, lad. I've left your gear on the bench inside. Your jacket's already hung up. He gave me a brisk, heavy-handed pat on the shoulder before turning back toward the reception door. We followed him inside. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting a warm, flickering glow that actually made the place feel, dare I say, inviting. A large topographical map was pinned behind a sheet of plexiglass on the far wall. It depicted the winding veins of a river, a cluster of radio towers, and several scattered lookouts. On the left side, Lake Ormond dominated the landscape, flanked by a camping area and 2 lookouts on either shore. One of those had to be mine. Judging by its distance from the reception desk, I wasn't looking forward to the hike. A sharp ding from the reception bell made me jump. Katie was leaning over the counter, a brass key dangling from her finger. Locker rooms are around to the left, she said, tossing the key toward me. I caught it midair. Go have a wash and get changed. Meet me back here when you're decent. I'm gonna go run these copies. She disappeared into a back office, leaving me alone with Tim. That was when I noticed the bulletin board. Last night, the glass had been so fogged with condensation it was just a blur, but now it was crystal clear. It wasn't just Darrell Woodgreen. The board was a collage of fading paper and desperate faces. Dozens of missing person posters were pinned there, some yellowed with age, others relatively fresh. Fuck asterisk, I thought, poor bastards. Morbid sight, ain't it? Tim's voice drifted over from the desk. He was leaning on his elbows, watching me with a look in his eyes. Knowing all them poor fucks are out there somewhere, probably dead. I gripped the locker key tight in my palm. Yeah, I also heard you tell that cop this place is haunted. You really think so? Tim let out a short, dry scoff. Something is up with these woods, I tell ya. People don't just up and disappear for no reason. I looked back at the wall of faces, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I thought. You have any idea how big these woods are? I asked, the silence suddenly feeling heavy. I read about a group of friends who went cave diving out here. They found them a year later, still wedged in the dark. There's more than just caves to worry about. Maybe, Tim replied. He'd been here a few years. He'd seen the seasons change and people vanish. Word of advice, this place fucks with your head, don't lose yourself. He gave a slow wink and took a pull of whiskey. I thought I smelt that walking in. Sorry, I don't mean to rattle you, Tim said, his rough laugh turning into a brief coughing fit. Guess being out here so long makes my mind wander to the dark places. Besides, I don't do much but sit in my tower watching god-awful horror movies anyway. I managed a weak smile, trying to shake off the image of the cave divers. So, are you a lookout like Katie and me? In a manner of speaking, he said, leaning back, though Dan's mostly got me driving around the park fixing up radio stations and whatever else breaks. Now he wants me to fix up the dorms, calls the place an eyesore. The fucker himself is a... Tim, Katie's head snapped around the doorframe, cutting him off. She looked pale. He can hear through the cameras, you know that. She turned her gaze to me, her eyes tight with a localized kind of panic. I don't mean to be rude, Nathan, but we have to move. If we leave now, we'll arrive just before sundown, and I really don't like walking these trails in the dark. Tim rolled his eyes but didn't argue. Dan asked me to drive you to the trailhead, so get on with it, lad. He jerked a thumb toward the hallway. Lockers are that way. I didn't need telling twice. I grabbed my rucksack and headed into the small, sterile locker room. I dropped my bag on a wooden bench and yanked open the locker assigned to me. A small, cracked mirror was bolted to the inside of the door. Jesus, I thought, staring at the reflection. My skin was sallow, my hair was a bird's nest of grease and rainwater, and I looked like I hadn't slept in a decade. I looked like one of the ghosts Tim was so worried about. I took the fastest shower of my life, scrubbing away the mud of the trail and the grime of the city. When I stepped out, I pulled on the fresh gear laid out for me. The green button-up felt stiff and new. The brown jacket was heavy and warm, with hollow PINES Ranger printed in bold, white letters across the back. I laced up the black boots and checked the mirror one last time. The mess was gone. For the first time, I actually looked like I belonged somewhere. I gathered the rest of my gear from the bench: a compass, a heavy-duty flashlight, binoculars, a handheld radio, and a folded topographical map. I shoved them into my rucksack and headed back to the lobby. It was empty now, but through the glass, I could see Katie sliding a heavy plastic bin into the bed of a battered pickup truck. Tim caught my eye and flashed a quick, sharp grin. I stepped outside, my new boots crunching against the sun-dried mud. "Move it or lose it, lad," Tim called out, already climbing into the driver's seat. "Coming, coming," Katie laughed, scrambling into the back. Tim reached over to swing the passenger door open for me. The engine roared to life before I even had my seatbelt clicked, the truck lurching forward with a violent tug. As we sped off, Katie began unfolding a map in the back seat, her brow furrowed in concentration. I leaned my head against the window, feeling the familiar, rhythmic vibration of the glass against my temple. Trees blurred past in a smear of dark green. The two of them bickered over the route, their voices rising and falling in a way that felt like old, practiced banter. Tim clearly had no love for Dan. His insults toward the boss were sharp and frequent. I couldn't blame him. I was still pissed that Dan hadn't bothered to show up, even if he had left the key under the mat. "Go right here," Katie directed, pointing at a fork in the trail. "I swear it's left," Tim grunted. "We just passed Twin Peak. Left is the way." "Left goes toward Ironbark, Tim. Don't be." "Trust me, I know these woods like my own hand. This is a shortcut." Tim yanked the wheel, veering off the main trail and onto a narrow, overgrown path. The canopy closed in instantly, swallowing the morning light. I stared into the side view mirror, watching the dust kick up. For a heartbeat, a figure appeared in the reflection, a man standing perfectly still among the trunks, watching us pass. "Hey," I muttered, my head still pressed to the glass. "Be careful, I think someone was back there." Tim snorted, "Probably just some dumb tourist. Happens all the time." No, this was different. He was just standing there, staring. "I swear, I've seen him before." I frowned, my hand running anxiously over my stubble. Katie leaned forward between the seats. "Did you get a good look? Was he wearing Ranger gear?" "Couldn't tell, it was too quick." We rode in silence for a minute, the truck bumping and grinding its way along the rutted path. The trees were thicker here, the air heavy and still. After a while, I started to feel paranoid, wondering if the man was still following us. "Pull over," I said suddenly. Tim slammed on the brakes, sending Katie tumbling forward. "What the hell, man?" I ignored him, yanking open the door and hopping out. I scanned the trees, but there was nothing, just the endless green. "I'm going to check it out," I said, grabbing the heavy-duty flashlight from my rucksack. "Stay here." "Are you insane?" Tim shouted. "You're going to get yourself lost." "I'll be fine, just wait here." I plunged into the woods, the flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The ground was soft and spongy beneath my feet, covered in a thick layer of decaying leaves. The air was damp and smelled of earth and pine. I walked for about 5 minutes, my senses on high alert. I kept expecting to see the man, but there was no sign of him. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I was already starting to lose it, just like Tim said. As I turned to head back, a glint of metal caught my eye. It was half buried in the leaves, almost hidden from view. I crouched down and brushed away the debris. It was a silver belt buckle, intricately engraved with a design I didn't recognize. It wasn't the design that sent a chill down my spine. It was the initials etched into the back. D.W. asterisk. Darrell Woodgreen, the missing man. Suddenly I heard a twig snap behind me. I spun around, raising the flashlight. And there he was, standing in the shadows, his face obscured by the darkness. But this time I could see him clearly. He was wearing Ranger gear, and he was holding something in his hand, something long and glinting. A rifle. He raised it to his shoulder, and a cold voice came from the trees. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. "You were never meant to find out." I don't see him, I hear him from the trees. The panic in my heart rises into my throat as the twig snaps again. He is closing in faster. The metallic taste of adrenaline rising in my mouth. The woods fall silent. My new life has to end, but why? As the barrel came level with my face, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't there to be a park ranger. I was there to find out who did this to me. I wasn't Nathan at all. I was Darrell Woodgreen's wife, and I was finally going to get my justice.